Back at the Joe Show here on AM 930 Progressive Talk, and guest today is a very interesting woman. She's got a lot of energy, and she's running for the State House of Representatives in District 43, not here in Whatcom County or in Bellingham, but down in the Seattle area. Kshama Sawant. She is a socialist, a member of Socialist Alternative, and decided to challenge a Democrat. Are there just two of you in the race down there? Is there not a Republican challenger?
There is no Republican challenger.
Okay, so it's way left versus left.
It is, and it's a very important thing to point out because it is a district where there are two state house seats. So the two incumbents currently are representatives of the Democratic Party, Jamie Peterson and Frank Chop. And interestingly, this is a district that is very likely one of the most liberal districts, progressive districts in the entire United States. And both the politicians that are running from there are well to the right of what the public that they represent. On all the issues on cuts to education and social services, cuts to public transit, the quality of public transit, the complete absence of mass transit, environmental issues. So I think it's a really good example to show why there's an urgent need for independent left challengers to really expose the corrupt politics of this two-party system.
All right, well, let's go to the phone, 734-5697. And John in Ferndale, welcome to the show.
Hi, Joe. Hi, Ms. Sawant. I listen to you, and I find myself agreeing with everything you say. As far as the coal terminals, and we live in a society. We have Social Security, and I'm wondering, how do you and other people who call themselves socialists? It seems like the right wing has done such a fantastic job of vilifying the term socialist. I'm wondering, what your strategy is, or if there is one, for fighting all the negative connotations that Fox News and right wingers put on that term socialist.
Thanks for that question. Yeah, that's a very good question. And I will start by agreeing with you. Yes, the right wing has done a really effective job over the last several decades, and primarily in the Cold War era, of completely vilifying the ideas of socialism. And it was not just here and there, but it was a massively and systematically orchestrated media propaganda network that carried that out. But the interesting thing that I would like to point out to encourage and empower all the other people that are like us out there, which I know that there are hundreds of millions of people out there who are thinking like us, is to point out that we are now living in an age of just a complete economic collapse of the global economy. And, the U.S. is feeling the brunt of it a little bit less than Europe is. But as we know, the way the global capitalist economy works, these effects are not going to stay regionalized, but they're going to be global impacts. And I think while the corporate media is doing its best to discredit the ideas of socialism, people, ordinary working people, and especially young people out there are thinking, wait a minute, capitalism is a dirty word because capitalism has failed us. We now have the most polarized society that we've had in the entire history and of our country. The levels of economic inequality and poverty that we are seeing now are unprecedented. But especially if you look at what the younger generation is going through, the younger generation is facing a double whammy. On the one hand, they're facing, the kinds of budget cuts to education that they have never experienced and they never expected. And then on the other hand, when if they are lucky enough to go to college and go get a job, to go out in the job market, there aren't any jobs for them. And so they are experiencing the reality that is America today, which is the younger generation is going to be worse off than the older generation. So I would say that young people today are actually starting to question, and that's where the Occupy movement came about. I've been an economist and activist for several years, and I can tell you that 2 years ago, nobody talked about class, nobody talked about inequality, nobody talked about capitalism, and nobody talked about socialism. But now all of that is on the agenda, and we can't pretend that everything is going to change overnight. But the point that we should focus on is that consciousness has shifted things are very different today than before. And also, I would like to point out two things. One is that if you look at the recent opinion polls, especially among those who are 18 to 30-year-old, their at least curiosity or desire to find out about socialism and identifying as socialists is as much as those who identify as capitalists. And the other tidbit I would like to point out is that socialism has more of an approval rating than U.S. Congress has. So, people are starting to question the political agenda.
Well, and kind of along the same lines, and I think it was an excellent question and an issue that John raised, is the whole, because socialism has been effectively tied, and not just in recent years by the far right, but I think, and it's been obviously exploited, that we saw the term bandied about during the campaign during 2008. You just knew they were gonna try and stick that title to Barack Obama, and they've done everything they can possibly do to do that. But it's been tied effectively, I think, by our media and just by our mindset to totalitarianism. And how do you think, how would you present the socialist concept, economic concept to greater America, to say, that's not what this is how it would function in our society? Do you get what I'm asking?
Yeah. That's a very good question. Yeah. I mean, that's an important thing, that that one of the reasons the propaganda did gain some legitimacy in the eyes of ordinary people in the United States is that they were able to connect the idea of, basically, like you said, totally tie the word of socialism to the idea of what was in the Soviet Union, which I would call Stalinism. I wouldn't call what existed in the Soviet Union socialism. It had elements of what I would include in a socialist economy, but ultimately it was, like as I said, Stalinism, which in other words, it was an economy which had some planned elements which were actually greatly beneficial for the population, contrary to the propaganda. The propaganda lied in those terms. For example, we had all these stories about the bread lines and extreme hunger and starvation and people just dying to get out of there. That was a completely gross and false exaggeration of what existed out there. Actually, I would like to point out first thing that despite all the problems that Stalinism had, which I would like to talk about in a second, simply because they had a planned economy, which is unlike a capitalist economy. A capitalist economy is controlled by a few very large multinational corporations. They control the political, economic, and social agenda everywhere in the world. Unlike that, in the Soviet Union, you had a planned economy which was able to solve the basic problems of hunger, starvation, access to healthcare and education and housing and jobs. What a basic thing that is, right? But let me tell you, capitalism in its 300 years of existence has come nowhere to solving that problem globally. So while they are telling you about all the awful things that happened under, in the Soviet Union, they're carefully avoiding telling you that capitalism is a system where 18 million people die simply because they're too poor to feed themselves every year, and 9 million of them are children under the age of 5. But that's globally. Look at what's happening in the United States. The U.S. is the wealthiest country in the world and in the history of humanity, and yet we have a situation where the top 1% has tens of trillions of dollars hidden away in offshore accounts, as was recently, today reported by Democracy Now! And on the other hand, you have extreme poverty, 50,000 people dying because they don't have any health insurance. So I think when we are talking about the propaganda, we have to first understand what capitalism actually is. And in terms of what is my idea of socialism and what existed in Soviet Union, one thing I would quickly say is that what was missing in the Soviet Union was actual democracy. It was what I would call, sort of a totalitarian regime, where ordinary people did not have the right to decide how resources would be used. But the reality is that that's the same with capitalism. Capitalism is a global totalitarian system where only the giant corporations and the few 100,000 super wealthy people in the world control the world's agenda. So it's every bit as totalitarian as the Soviet Union was, and perhaps more, And so what we would fight for, and what we would say socialism is a global, democratically planned economy where all the decisions of how to use the wealth, how to use the resources, how to allocate funding for different things would be decided democratically by the people. And that's what's missing. People don't have the right to decide how to use the enormous, enormous wealth in this country because they don't have their hands on the wealth. They just go to work and they work hard every day and they don't get anything out of it.
Very good, very well said, I think. And ultimately, we have to separate. We often think of our system or our systems when we compare it to the old Soviet system as our economy and our freedoms as spelled out in the Constitution, for instance, the Bill of Rights. That those are somehow intricately linked. That they are, and that's very far from the truth. That our civic rights, the rights we enjoy as individuals, are not tied to any one specific economic system. That our economic system is not spelled out in the Constitution. It's not something that, even though that we're told that day in and day out that that's what America is unbridled capitalism. But we got to take a quick break. We'll be back with more, including your calls. We got some folks on the line, and we will get to you in just a moment. My guest is Kshama Sawant. She is a socialist running for the State House of Representatives in the District 43. She's speaking this evening, 6 p.m. at Western Washington University, the Academic Instructional Center West, room 203, and it's a free event. Back with more here in just a moment on The Joe Show.